Hi, awesome members of the Nest. Thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere, but you chose to be here with us. And tonight we're talking to Nancy Crochiere, the author of Graceland. How's it going?
It's great. Great. How are you guys?
Good. Excited to talk about Graceland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. You
It's
want me
good
to go, Jenny?
For members who may not know you yet, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Nancy Crochiere, and I've written, this is my debut novel, Graceland. You can see it here in front of you. You can see it behind me. You can see it everywhere. Do you want me to talk about my background or just?
Sure, whatever.
Yeah, start with your background.
Okay. I was a humor columnist for 13 years while my daughters were growing up. I always wanted to be an author, but I deferred that dream as somebody who had to help work full time and raise children. And so I would write short, humorous pieces for a newspaper chain up here in northeastern Massachusetts. And I did that for 13 years until my daughters were grown. It was a family-oriented humor column, kind of, if you're familiar with Irma Bombeck, that may be before your time, but that sort of thing. All the funny stuff that happens with, two people busy with jobs and trying to raise children. Anyway, yeah, my girls grew up. They went to college. I completely ran out of material, and I decided to turn my attention to my lifelong dream to write a novel. So it took a few years, but that's what I've been doing since then. And the result is Graceland, which was published by HarperCollins at the end of May.
So exciting.
Yeah, what was your transition like between writing the columns and writing a novel? Were there a lot of I don't know, writing exercises, things to kind of get you in that mindset of a novel?
It turns out, I thought, oh, I've written so many columns, I can string together 80,000 words, but it's a very different genre, very different technique. So I took classes at Grub Street, which I know you are both familiar with. It's a great writing center in the Boston area. And so I started taking classes there. And there's one in particular called the Novel Incubator. It's a year-long program, one of the few in the country that really teaches you how to put together a novel and then how to market it and how to pitch it. And there aren't too many, the MFA programs don't tend to do that. They tend to focus on short fiction. So I think there are a few other programs now, but for a while, Grub Street was the only one. And I did that for a year. And yeah, it was definitely a huge learning curve to, know everything about, deep character development and character arcs and how to up the stakes for your protagonist, point of view, how to correctly use dialogue, what really makes a scene and what is not a scene. All that stuff is part of what you learn in the program. So it was a huge education for me.
What was the favorite thing that you learned there?
Favorite thing. I love the concept of the ticking clock. Are you familiar with that? With all great novels, if you want to get the reader drawn in, you include a ticking clock as part of the plot. There's some reason that everything has to be done by this time, and as the reader's going along, the characters are aware that time is running out and that they have this clock always in the back of their minds. So it really helps with, suspense and propelling the plot forward.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm just now in my head thinking about all kinds of different books that have used that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some use it more than others when, it's often used with, uh, I shouldn't say this because I don't write thrillers, but I was going to say something like a thriller.
Mhm.
We have to find this person before he kills again or before she kills again.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that you wrote a humor column, and your first published book was a compiled version of all of your essays from your columns. How was that
Yeah,
experience? Oh, sorry. Go
I,
ahead.
yeah, not all of them
Mhm.
because I did write the column for 13 years. So we sort of picked out
Mhm.
the reader favorites and my favorites and put them together in a volume that was called The Mother Lode. And that was the name of my column was The Mother Lode. And yeah, that was published in 2014.
Cool. And how was that publishing process different from the novel?
Well, it was very different because actually a friend and I had a little publishing venture for that lasted about a year or two, and so we sort of published it ourselves. So it wasn't the same process with the novel where I went through, where I had to get an agent, or I wanted to get an agent. Obviously, one always has the option to self-publish or go to an indie publisher. But after the experience with my columns, I wanted to uh, try to get one of the big five publishers to publish
Mhm.
my novel. And so that really absolutely requires an agent. They're the gatekeepers, and
Mhm.
they're the hardest part sometimes of the journey is getting the agent is the tough part. Sometimes the publishing deal comes fairly quickly after that, as it did for me.
Sounds good.
What was the process of finding an agent like?
Well, I started querying in February of 2020, which, if it doesn't set off alarm bells in anybody's mind, I think
Oh,
it should. Yeah, it was a tricky time, let's just say, because I think, immediately after that, uh, agents, publishers, nobody was really sure what the world was going to look like,
mhm.
what people were going to want to read in this environment. And I think it really did change people's reading habits for a short period of time. I think the books that were bought during that period were largely a lot of big name authors, people, or series. People kept
Mhm.
reading in series. It was hard for debut authors. I so I took about 8 months where I was querying agents, and I kept getting some interest, and people would request the whole manuscript and look at it, but I didn't get any offers. And I took it back, the manuscript, and I cut out about 20,000 words, which, yes, in retrospect, it needed to be pruned down. So there's a tip for writers: really make sure your word count is within the range, the appropriate range for your genre to begin with. And I also worked with a development editor just to be sure that I wasn't missing anything, that all
Mhm.
the themes were tied up, that all the characters had appropriate character arcs. So I did that, and as soon as I was done with that revision, which took about another year, I got an agent very quickly after that, and then um, she and I worked together for another revision within about, I think, within 2 weeks of when she started sending it out to publishers. I had the book deal offered with HarperCollins.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a part of the process we don't hear as much about when we have chats
Mhm.
as the agent and querying and all that stuff. So it's interesting to hear.
It's hard. I mean, you find quite a variety of experiences too. I mean, there are some people who get very lucky and they send out their first set of query letters, because you usually send them out in a batch of about, you know, eight or so
Mhm.
every, and you wait to see what that response you get, and then you send out a next batch. There are some people who do get somebody interested right away, but the more frequent situation is that it can often take about a year And for some people, struggle with it for much longer.
Well, let's get into some Graceland. To start off, did you do anything fun to celebrate the release of the book?
um, well, there's been some champagne. Yeah, there's been some cake. I definitely am a big fan of cake. I demanded cake. Um, and I've had a couple of book launches. One, I live north of Boston, so one up here north of Boston where I live, one in Boston with my Grub Street community, and then I'm doing one actually in my hometown of in Western Massachusetts, the place where I grew up for until I was college age. So so it's been fun. It's been a lot of celebration.
Awesome. So first, tell us a little bit about Graceland, your book, not the place.
No, thank you for clarifying. Yeah. That's why we put the subtitle on it, Graceland, a novel. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't say that, but it's sort of necessary because there are actually, a lot of books about Graceland. So Graceland, my Graceland novel is it's the story of a single mom who is forced to chase her Elvis obsessed mother and her pink haired teenage daughter to Memphis to stop them from revealing a long held secret. So that's kind of the log line there. And if you want, I can go into more detail than that, but it's a multi generational road trip chase, basically from Boston to Memphis, with three women, all of them having their own agenda and all of them at odds with each other, and each of them in their own way, sort of searching for self acceptance, forgiveness, and grace.
You really have that succinctly put. I like
Yeah.
Well, that's what as I was saying, what you learn is that you've got to have a log line. You've got to have your elevator pitch, right? You've got
Mhm.
to be able to describe your book in a sentence. But I can go into more detail if you think, people would be interested in it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you want to tell us a little bit more, some of it we might get into with some of the questions, but if you want to tell us a little bit more about maybe the characters themselves.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of my most fun characters is the grandmother character. Olivia Grant has been a soap opera star. She's a washed up soap opera star right now. She was on a soap opera for 45 years, and she played this villainess named Andromeda on this soap opera. And she so she became quite a celebrity, and she even had a date with Elvis in her youth. But she's been Elvis obsessed all her life, and so now her soap has been canceled, and she is ailing. She's on oxygen with COPD, and the one thing that she wants is to see Graceland again before she dies. And so, but to do that, with her oxygen and her limitations, she needs her daughter Hope to take her. Hope uh, would do anything to please her mom. Hope is a single mom herself, but the one thing she can't do is go back to Memphis. And that's because she left Memphis 18 years ago with a secret, and she can't go back. So instead, Olivia turns to her Hope's daughter, Dylan, who is the 16-year-old, pink haired activist who is actually very angry with her mom right now because she's found out that her mom has been lying to her all her life about her father. So she's furious with her mother, and when her grandmother says, "Hey, you want to go with me to Memphis? I think you can actually meet your father there for the first time in your life." Dylan is completely on board with that. That's the one thing that she's always wanted, is to meet this mystery father. Her mother has told her father's dead. And she's recently realized that's not true, that her mother's been lying to her. So the idea that she could meet her father in Memphis is great. So they take off together, and Hope has no choice but to chase after them and try to stop them, because if they reveal her secret, it's going to be a disaster for the family.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's Graceland. That's Graceland in a nutshell.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired Graceland? Like, have you always been an Elvis fan? I'm sure everyone asks you this question.
No, and it's a fair question, and the answer is that I, while I always had a great deal of respect for Elvis and what he did musically, I wasn't as big a fan until I started actually researching the book and reading more about him and watching all the various movies and documentaries and his movies. And yeah, I definitely read a 2-volume biography of Elvis, so I've become much more of an Elvis fan during this whole researching and writing the book. But he definitely musically was just sort of an instinctive genius in his own way, and I think I really love his humble beginnings. I think it's sad that what eventually happened to him, what fame can do to somebody who is kind of sweet and humble like that. Um, but I just was watching a, a movie. It's called Elvis: The Way It Was or The Way It Is the other night, and gosh, he was such an incredible performer.
Mhm.
Um, even right to the end, he was such an incredible performer, and he had those smoking eyes, right? I mean, he was just so yeah. So I mean, Elvis was definitely a part of. Elvis became a part of the book almost unexpectedly. I chose Graceland because I thought it was just sort of a funny destination for Olivia to be sort of Elvis obsessed and have to go back there. And but I also chose it because I loved the metaphor of Graceland, that these characters are all in their own way searching for grace on this trip.
Mhm.
So those were the main reasons for it being Graceland. And once it was Graceland, Elvis had to be a part of it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
Yeah, for this book, because it was my debut novel, I have to say that if you talk with people about being pantsers versus
Yeah.
plotter, and I found some
Mhm.
people know that terminology and other people don't.
Mhm.
But yeah, pantsers are people who kind of write by the seat of their pants, just gonna go, and plotters are people who have an outline, who write from that. And for this book, I was definitely a pantser because I didn't know what I was doing. I just started and was going chronologically, and I would get stuck, and I would take these classes that would help me get through it. I think going forward, I want to be more of a plotter because I probably wrote, 500,000 words in order to get to the 80,000 words that are finally in the book. And I don't relish the idea of doing that all again. Um, and I think now that I know more about the novel form, I should be able to do it a little bit more efficiently next time. But I like to tell people in terms of my writing process that, if you can't be a good example, at least be a horrible warning. So I think my experience was a little bit of a horrible warning.
Were you a plotter when you were writing your columns?
That's a very good question. I'm going to think about this for a second. Um, I think not always. It's a good point. Sometimes I had a sense of where it was going to go. Sometimes I knew how it was going to end. And so then you have more of a sense of the shape. And sometimes I just had an idea to start out with, and I didn't know where it was going. And I have to admit that those were the hardest ones to make work.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially I'm sure you had like a set word count about that you had to get or number of
Mhm.
inches.
Yeah, yeah, they were all about 700 words or
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
that makes
tight.
it even trickier, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it is, it's true that, the shorter the piece, the more picky you have to be about your words. I mean, I don't know if either of you writes poetry, I don't, but I
Mhm.
truly admire the word, smithing there.
Mhm.
No, but I went to school for journalism, so I'm just a lot of my writing is just like, "Get to the point as soon as possible." Like
Did you go to the University of Minnesota for journalism?
I did not. I went to Loyola in Chicago,
Mhm.
so I have left Minnesota.
You've been out once or twice. They let you out.
I did. Yes, but there's a weird phenomenon where people that have grown up in Minnesota usually will leave for a bit and then come back to stay forever, so
It's Minnesota is a lovely place. My husband and I, we lived there for 5 years. We easily could have stayed, but we had family back east, and so that's why we came back. But we loved Minnesota. We had a great time. We love the Twin Cities.
it's a fun spot. I mean, I did you get a bunch of snow this year near you, or was it more like a
I think it
worse?
wasn't a very snowy year here. It's awful. I'm pausing because I actually went on a vacation to Iceland this year, and so I was like, so
Oh,
he's like, well, where was that snow? No, I think that was in Iceland.
well, we had like I think it ended up being either the third or the fourth snowiest winter ever in Minnesota. So
Nope.
just happy it's summer now.
Nope.
When I moved to Minnesota, yeah, of course, everybody said, "Oh, the winters, the winters, the winters." And the first two winters we were there were relatively mild in Minnesota terms. And I even talked a friend into moving out there. She was considering it, and she had grown up in New England as I had, and I said, it's not any worse. Well, of course, in the 3 years after that, we broke every record for, snowfall and cold. I mean, it was like,
Mhm.
yeah, wind chills of, -80 or something. I don't know. It was horrible.
No.
You don't know anything about that in Atlanta, I'm sure. Thank goodness.
No. Everything shuts down if there's half an inch of snow on the ground. So, yeah.
Yes, it's every winter. I'm like, why do I still live here? So, anyway,
Beautiful summers. I
yeah.
bet the summers in Atlanta are pretty hot.
Yes. Yes. But I mean, we've been about 90, just like Minnesota. So,
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah,
yep.
Minnesota has some. I remember there was always some very hot weeks in the middle of the summer.
yes, it's picking back up tomorrow, apparently. Just 2 days
Probably
of
doesn't.
cooler weather and then
Yeah. Probably doesn't last from mid-April to mid-October, though.
Which,
it
yeah.
did last year, kind of.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, so why going back to Graceland, why did you feel it was important to include the multiple generations in this faithful road trip?
I was interested, I think that's where the story actually started for me. I'd written the column for years about raising daughters. I had two daughters. And I've recently become a grandmother. And so I'd been in all those situations. I'd been a mother, I'd been a daughter, I'd been a grandmother. And I also just found it fascinating, the idea of, how traits sometimes seem to skip a generation in
Mhm.
families, both physical traits and personality traits. You'll sometimes, you'll have a child that either resembles a grandparent or in
Mhm,
physically or in terms of their personality. And so I started imagining, well, what would happen if there was a grandmother and granddaughter who were actually very much alike, and very different than the mother, and suppose they bond together and sort of, go off on this caper that the mother really opposes. So that's where Graceland started, sort of with that idea of the grandmother and the granddaughter taking off, and the mother just being distraught for any number of reasons, including their safety, but also because she opposes what they're thinking of doing.
And as you were talking, I was like, yes, I want to ask you about that. And now I don't remember what it was.
Well, I'm glad it's you and not me, because I do a lot of that these days. What was I about to say?
I think it was going to be a comment about, yeah, I found it really interesting when Dylan is like, oh, I must have gotten all of these like traits like from my dad. And it was like, no, actually, it seems like it is more from Olivia, your grandmother. And it just kind of skipped over to you.
Yeah, that's part of Dylan's journey, is she's trying to find herself, and she thinks, well, I'm just not like my mother at all. My mother wants me to be cautious. Um, and I'm just, Dylan is a very impulsive child, teenager, and so she thinks, well, I must be like my father, brave and bold and an activist, and she sort of hangs her hat on that idea. And I won't tell you what happens, but
Here was the actual question that I just remembered. So your book is told through the three different point of views of each of the women. What made you want to go down that route for Graceland?
well, it's interesting, because initially I had just Hope, the single mom, and 40ish, and Dylan as being the only narrators, because I was interested in sort of keeping Olivia's motivations more mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
And over many drafts, people convinced me, and this is a true thing for any writers out there listening, is that people are much more invested in your characters if they know what their motivations are. Um, and readers get very annoyed very quickly if you're withholding information from them. So in the end, I made Olivia narrator, and that felt nice in terms of the balance of the three generations telling the story. But it was also a real win for the book, because Olivia's voice was just so out there. She's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, an outlandish character. She's fun. She is one of those characters that just sort of came to me fully formed, and always knew exactly what she was going to do or say in any situation. She had just had that strong a personality that you just she wrote herself, basically. Yeah.
Do you have a point of view that you liked writing better than the others, or was one easier or harder?
I'd say, Dylan was a little harder. Um, I mean, Hope's voice, a lot of Hope's issues, she's a people pleaser, and she's a little bit of an introvert, and she just feels like she wants to be more of an extrovert. She wants to please her mom. She wants to please her boss. She's having trouble doing that. Some of that came from personal experience. So that was very easy. Dylan was trickier, and the teenager. And I actually, in the end, hired a young person to read the manuscript and help me, both in terms of the current slang. I thought I knew the slangs, but my daughters now yeah, it changes so quickly. Yeah, I was using my daughter was laughing at me recently. She was like, you were using things that I say. That's not current slang. Yeah. So I got a teenager to read it and suggest slang, and also cultural references, and what seemed to her realistic and not realistic, and that helped a lot. But that was definitely Dylan was my struggle.
That's definitely a smart idea to
Yeah.
get a beta reader like that. Wow, I can't talk, beta reader.
Yeah.
um, yeah, you can go, Jenny, with the next
Okay.
question. I don't. I'm like, it's been a weekend. I don't know what's going on with my brain today.
What made you decide on the VW Bug as the transportation?
I wrote an article recently about how I think there's something with us baby boomers, that there's always a VW Beetle in our past somewhere. We have this love affair with it, with bugs, and definitely it was the case in my family. We owned a couple of them when I was growing up, but particularly the one that stands out stands out in my mind. Excuse me. My father came home one day with this just this incredibly bright yellow VW Beetle with a red and black racing stripe on it, and we were all like, "Oh my God, my father's having a midlife crisis. You know what's what's going on here?" But that was the car I learned to drive on, and I just adored that car. It was like a centerpiece of my teenage world. And so it just seemed natural when I was trying to think of a getaway car for Dylan and Olivia. Not only one that would be uh, ancient, because it's a 1998 VW Beetle that's been, repurposed, that they're driving in. So not only ancient, but small and tight. You can imagine the issues that involved. But I wanted it to be something that Dylan would just love, and so the Bug was the only car I considered.
Okay,
Yeah.
here's the question I was thinking about. So for you as a pantser in this case for this novel, as you were writing, were there any characters that kind of came out and surprised you that you hadn't really planned on including, or any of the side characters that were your favorites?
Yeah, well, there's a detective character that was added into the manuscript late in the manuscript, and uh, he's kind of a quirky guy, and a little guy in a fedora and a seersucker suit, and um, but he um, he ended up playing a more pivotal role than I originally anticipated. So I really enjoyed that character, and I also have a secondary character, not one of the three women, but an important person on the journey is Hope's cousin George, who is also her best friend. And George proudly cross dresses as Jordan. So I'm going to, George is an auto mechanic by trade, goes by George, he, him during the week, and dresses as Jordan, she, her on the weekends. So on the trip, it's Jordan, and she provides a fabulous foil for Hope
Mhm.
because Jordan has been through this. Well, one of the I should say I'm going to back up a little bit here. One of the themes of the book is identity. It's this idea of trying to embrace who we are apart from who others want us to be. And all the three women are sort of dealing with this theme as they're on this journey. And Hope in particular, who has been hiding herself, has been telling lies, which she's horrible at. She's just a horrible liar, and um, but she doesn't really understand that she has a problem and that she's not really happy with who she is. And Jordan provides a great foil because Jordan has had to deal with this issue all her life, and has had to work hard to, embrace her truth as
Mhm.
opposed to who others, like her family of origin, wanted her to be. So she is somebody who during the road trip can kind of push at Hope constantly and challenge her and poke her toward sort of coming to her a better understanding of what her issues are.
Yeah,
And
I love
she also has stuff to teach Hope about being a good ally to her friend.
I love Jordan.
Thank you. Yes, Jordan was another favorite character. Yes.
Yes, just the description of a 6'5" woman with like a Farrah Fawcett blonde wig. I was like, okay, yep, all right.
Yes, this was based on somebody that I knew who had that lifestyle and that identity, and yeah, it definitely is a challenge when you're cross dressing or when you're trans and you're 6'5". It it's
Mhm,
hard to pull off, but this person I knew did it fabulously.
mhm. So, how did you navigate this topic and other serious topics with humor and wit kind of sprinkled throughout the book?
There are serious themes and there are serious topics in here, but I think it's just a matter of sort of your lens on the world. I don't think any of the issues is treated lightly, but just the experiences that the characters have day to day that lead them into these issues are humorous. And I've always written humor. It's where I'm comfortable. Again, I think it's I like making people laugh. I like seeing life as much as we can, with a through a light perspective. Everybody has some comedy and tragedy. You can't
Mhm,
you can't escape it. And I wouldn't want to write a book that was fully, uh, comic. I wanted to treat some serious issues, but I hoped that it would be a fun read where people would still come out of it with stuff to discuss in their book groups and stuff to think about.
definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely a good I felt like it was a really good balance between the humor and the some serious stuff and some heart and some
Heartfelt stuff too. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's some definite relationship, issues. And thank you. Thank you for saying there was a good
Yeah.
balance. That was certainly the goal.
Um, can so we love talking about covers. Can we talk about yours? Did you have a say in the design? Was it like what was it like seeing the finished cover for the first time?
It was amazing. The HarperCollins hit it out of the park with this cover. Um, I worked in publishing actually for a number of years. I worked in educational publishing, which is both very different and also has some aspects that are the same. But I was a development editor for educational publishing. In fact, I started in the Twin Cities with West Publishing, which
Oh,
probably had a college department back then. I'm not sure what the status is anymore. That part of the business was sold anyway. Um, Regardless, I as an editor, a former editor, I knew how to write a cover memo and I knew exactly what I wanted. So I sort
Mhm.
of described what I was seeing out there in, women's book club fiction. And it was
Mhm.
all, a lot of it was this style. If you read, Emily Henry or
Mhm.
Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby
mhm,
Van Pelt. And I'm trying to think of some of the other bright colors covers I was seeing out there. So I wanted bright. I wanted this kind of style, and I showed them lots of examples. And like I said, they absolutely nailed it. It was I. It is the comment that I get most from everyone That cover is great. So yay. For those who want to judge a book by its cover, okay, good. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
If that gets you to read it, hey.
So, have you been to Graceland since
I
you're
have.
yeah.
Yeah. I've been twice. Yeah, and it's an experience. I mean, when have you been? Have either of you been?
No.
Mm-mm.
No. It's, the first thing I think people feel about it is that it was a mansion back in the day, and
Mhm.
it just doesn't feel that big compared to today's housing, but you know, it was for the time, and certainly the grounds around it are extensive, but I think the memorial garden where Elvis and, his parents are buried, and now Lisa Marie, I think that that part is very moving. Otherwise, there's a lot of decorating in the house that you can sort of make fun of because it's very much of an era. We
Mhm.
don't green shag carpeting. It's just not today's style, but it provides a very realistic sense of what it's exactly how it was when Elvis was living there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like a time capsule of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the jungle room people, I kind of had Hope, my character, who Hope doesn't like Elvis because her mother loves him so much, so she's always just reacted against that. So she's although during her journey she comes to appreciate Elvis more as she listens to his music. And um but she talks about the jungle room, which is the room that where there's Hawaiian carved wood furniture, and I think there's a waterfall, and there's a green shag carpet not just on the floor but on the ceiling and the walls. I think part of that um, to justify, I think, why Elvis did that. I think for a while they used it as a recording studio in the later years of his life, and he was the the carpeting on the ceiling was like soundproofing. So,
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, green shag carpeting.
yeah, it's something I don't think any of us miss.
My mom went to school in Memphis, so
Oh,
she has never wanted to go back, but you know,
did she go? Was it Memphis State back then, or?
Southwestern at Memphis, that Smith
Okay.
Rhodes College.
Hmm.
So, yeah. Um, have you ever been on a life-changing road trip?
Wow, that's a good question. Life-changing road trip, huh?
Or a favorite road trip.
Well, I did the road trip with a friend as part of researching the book. I went to Memphis 3 times, and one of the times was to do the actual road trip just to be sure that I had everything plotted out right. And it was important to, it was a good thing I did that, because it's like, no, you can't drive 2 hours from here and still be in, Virginia. You're going to be in Tennessee by then. So you find out things. But it was a ton of fun. There's some really beautiful country that you
Mhm.
go through. And yeah, I had a lot of fun researching the book in Memphis. I was trying to get a real realistic picture of some of the places that I was setting the characters in. And so I wanted to see what politician's office in Memphis would look like, not it because it's a satellite office, not the politician's a senator's main office. It's the Memphis office, so smaller. So I wanted to see what that was like, and I wanted to see what the police facilities were like. So I sort of had to talk myself into a lot of places, into a senator's office and into a jail facility where the police officer wasn't for a minute buying my story that I was a writer. I would ask questions like, well, what would somebody where would somebody who was arrested at the Peabody Hotel go in here? And he would say, well, what did your friend do? No, no. Not my friend. I'm a writer and I'm trying to imagine this and I'm trying to, well, where's your friend now? No, no, just probably for good reason, but he was not buying my story. But eventually it was very helpful. He wouldn't let me see a jail cell, but he described it to me.
I mean, I feel like there can't be that much variation on jail cells.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, and I think to be honest with you, I think I got a little obsessed at one point about accuracy, because all writers hear about the people that stand up at your readings and
Yeah.
say, on the corner of BB King Boulevard and some other street, there's a traffic light, and you have it as a stop sign, and you're like, okay, yeah. So I was trying to be as careful as I could, especially because I knew people from Memphis would read it, and I wanted them to think that I had put in the time. Um, and I even talked to a historian at one of the Memphis libraries that helped me sort of envision what Memphis had been like 18 years prior to when the book was set. So
That's very cool.
yeah, it was all good. Like I said, I probably went too far down that road. I could have just said, and in some cases you have to. I mean, there's certain things that you just have to make up.
Mhm.
What do you hope that readers take away from Graceland?
I think, well, I mean, a couple things. I think it's a fast-paced, fun read. So I hope that they pick it up as a great summer read, but that they take away from it, you know, an attachment to some characters who really have some, heartfelt issues. And I think there's some interesting themes and stuff for discussion. So, I hope people pick it up for their book group and find a lot to talk about.
I could just let you know, I could definitely read a whole book that was just about Olivia in her Andromeda years. So,
Yeah, it was fun writing about that because, I don't know, if you watched many soap operas. Yeah,
some Days of Our Lives, my mom's is Young and the Restless is her
mm,
trope.
my grandmother lived with me growing up and she would watch me after school and there was a whole string of, As the World Turns, Another World, Days of Our Lives, The Doctors. Those
Yeah.
were the ones that she watched. So I was used to watching soap operas. I haven't watched them as much in recent years, but when I started researching it, I discovered that so many of them had really, jumped the shark in terms of their storylines and so I had fun talking about that with Olivia, and probably could have played it up even more. I was, I because the plot was so complicated, I really had to, kind of squeeze everything into the 384 pages, but you could go on and on forever about Olivia's being kidnapped by a cult and fighting off pirates and, giving birth to an alien baby or, whatever it was that I made up for her character. Um, Lots of fun.
I do have a question that I want to make sure we get to from one of our members. It's a two-part question.
Two-part one.
Coming back to when we were talking about you finding an agent, did you having a publishing venture before that help you when picking up an agent for trade publishing? Is the first part.
No, not not related at all. I mean, the fact that because, my friend and I had this little publishing venture essentially, my book was considered self-published, and that's never going to be unfortunately, unless your self-published book ends up being like, what's the one I'm trying to think of, the famous one that became a bestseller. It'll come to me, but yeah, unless you sell just thousands and thousands of copies of your self-published book, it's never going to be a credential um, for getting an agent, sadly.
And kind of leaning into that, then, how do you feel about the way the big five publishers have shifted with the rise of e-publishing and self-publishing?
How they've shifted?
Yeah. I think it's hard for me to say exactly what
Yeah.
I've noticed a
I'm
lot
going
of them
for.
buying, like, I guess, indie published or self-published books and like republishing them. Like, I've noticed that with a lot of Katie Roberts books.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, are these like authors so self-published who did very
Mhm.
well, and then the big publishers picked them up?
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know too much about that. And I heard somebody talking about that recently and saying, well, why would you want to be traditionally published? You can make so much more self-published, and and I think unfortunately, it's the exception rather than the rule. Yes, there are some
Mhm.
people who, particularly if they already have a following, and
Mhm.
they self-publish some books. Yes, they do very well in romance. I think certain genres you can do well, but it this person was saying, well, there's like 20 of them, and it's like, well, there's 20 of them, but there's probably a million self-published books a year. So it's really unfortunately the exception rather than the rule
Mhm.
that a big publisher would pick it up. Most don't.
That that was what the member was going for, so thanks.
Okay.
I don't, and I always hate to sound like discouraging about anything, because there's always exceptions, right? But
Mhm.
you also have to look at the reality of it. And that was what I learned and was told by agents, is that,
Mhm.
yeah, don't count on self-publishing and then being picked up by a big publisher,
Mhm.
because once your book is out there, they figure it had its shot and they're not going to pick it up.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
As much as you don't want it to.
Yeah.
So we know obviously Graceland just came out, but can you tell us anything about your next project or something that you're working on?
I do. I have started writing another novel, but I haven't been working on it much recently because I've been doing publicity for Graceland.
Mhm.
So no, I can't really tell you about it. I have to kill you. Yeah. um, but I do look forward to writing more novels, and that's why it's so important to me that Graceland succeeds as my debut novel. I want the publisher
Mhm.
to be happy with it. I want to, be able to write many more.
Do you think you're gonna stick in this similar genre
I
for
think
now?
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if it's successful. That's probably what they're looking for me to do. Um, I do like the combination of humor and heart,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm. So can readers get your oh goodness. Can readers get signed copies of your book anywhere?
Yes, in random places right now. I'm of course I live in the Newburyport, Massachusetts area. There's some signed copies around here. I'm going to be signing some copies in Hyannis on Cape Cod this weekend, and then I'm going out to St. Paul, Minnesota, and going to be appearing at Next Chapter Bookstore, but I'm going to be visiting some other bookstores around the Twin Cities and signing some copies. Columbia, Missouri. After that, those are my road trip plans right now. They will expand, but that's where we're starting. That's June. June is busy. We haven't even gotten to figure out what July is going to be next.
Well, it's super fun that you get to go visit all these places.
Yeah, it's fun, especially going back to places like St. Paul where I used to live, and getting to see a lot of my old friends.
Yes, Next Chapter is literally like 4 blocks away from me right now. So, but yeah,
Send your friends over.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll put a link up to that one when our chat uploads, and people can request signed copies there from you. All right. So last question we like to ask is, and I know you gave us a little bit about plotting and pantsing and stuff. Can you give us any other advice you have for aspiring authors?
I like to talk about persistence, because I feel like my journey to get an agent wasn't immediate. It wasn't easy. It was just persistence. And I thought about giving up after at the 8 months, but I just read the manuscript over, and I said, you know what, I can't. I like this. I just really liked it, and I didn't want to put it in a drawer. So I instead chose to revise it again. And so for me, persistence is a key thing. And I also just am a strong believer in workshopping, because I think it's hard for writers it's certainly hard for me, but I think it's true for all writers, to see your own work with any perspective. You've got to have other people read it and say, this is good, this is good, this is working, but you're losing me here, or this idea needs more work. I think it's the only way to get to where you need to be, basically.
Love it. What was there any particular, like, I don't know, like quote or like idea, like, I mean, obviously that you loved this manuscript, but like what kept you going and trying?
What did I like about it that kept me?
Yeah, or like I guess what was some other like inspiration that kind of kept you motivated to work on it and pursue it?
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly.
I don't know either.
um, I've always been told that if you have a dream in your life, that you picture it, and just keep that picture in your mind. And one of the things, this is a really weird thing, but I always had a dream of my book appearing in airports, being sold in airports. I don't know why. I just thought, well, because it's so fun to be going on a trip and to just grab a book from the bookstore there. And so that's been a great thrill for me recently, is to people keep sending me pictures of my book in different airports, in Cleveland, in Indianapolis, in Logan, in Newark. So I've very much enjoyed that. And visualize what you want.
That's perfect. That was
Yes.
pretty much what I was trying to get at. And that's so cool. I'm glad that people are sending you pics. That's really fun. All right. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I hope your audience got something useful out of this.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you back. So I'll be watching out for announcements for your next book.
Might take a year or two.
Yeah. Thankfully, we have someone on our team who kind of goes back and like checks on authors that we've chatted with to see when their next book is coming out and like updates the list for us. Shout out to
Nice.
Erin. So so she'll catch it if I don't see it.
All right. Absolutely.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to the Nest for being here. Our next author chat is happening on Wednesday, June 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and it will be with Brindy Quinn, who is the author of Come True. All right. Have a good night, everyone.